They laughed when he bought the abandoned barn for $1.00 until they saw the chains in the basement. Red Hollow, Texas, spring, 1885. The sky over Red Hollow was the color of old tin, dull and bruised. Dust hung low across the flatlands, and the wind whistled through leaning fences like it remembered something terrible. On the porch of the sheriff's office, a group of men laughed hard enough to cough. "He paid a whole $1 for it," one of them shouted. Humph. Laughter followed like gunfire. Wes Callahan didn't look back. He didn't need to. He'd heard that kind of laugh before, in uniform, in bars, in his own damn head. The kind that said you were either too brave or too broken to be understood. A barn, that was the joke. An abandoned, rat-eaten, half-collapsed barn on the south edge of town. It hadn't stored anything but shadows in 3 years, ever since the previous owner rode west and never came back. It leaned crooked, like it had secrets in its bones. He'd bought it for $1 at auction. The hammer dropped and the town snorted, but Wes didn't buy it for animals or grain. He'd bought it because it felt like the only place in Red Hollow that wasn't pretending, and because something about it, something quiet, had drawn him in. The outer door shrieked as he pulled it open. Sunlight sliced through cracks in the warped walls, catching dust in the air like smoke. The place smelled of rust, mold, and underneath it all, something bitter, like old blood and iron. Wes stepped carefully across the warped floorboards. Toward the back of the barn, the wood changed, subtle but sure. 4 planks, newer than the rest, clean edges, different grain, and freshly replaced. He crouched down, ran his calloused fingers along the seams. Someone had recently opened this and sealed it again. He knocked. Thump. Solid thump. Solid thump. Then hollow. Wes stilled, his breath caught in his throat. He knocked again. Hollow. He pressed his ear against the floor. At first nothing. Then a sound. A breath. Shallow, ragged, barely there. And then scratching. Fingernails on wood. Slow. Measured. Not panicked. Just trying to be heard. Wes's spine went rigid. He stood, pulled the pry bar from his satchel, and slid it beneath the trapdoor's edge. The locks, 2 of them, thick and unmarked, weren't rusted at all. They didn't belong to a place this forgotten. That alone made his skin prickle. He wedged the bar in deeper and heaved. Wood splintered. Metal groaned. One lock snapped, the other held. Another sound came from below. Whimpering, West's heart beat hard against his ribs. He grit his teeth and pushed again. The second lock gave way with a screech. He lifted the trapdoor slowly. The hinges groaned, and a cold, damp draft rose to meet him. He lit his oil lamp and lowered it down into the dark. At first only shadows, then metal chains, then eyes. She moved before he had time to think. A woman launched from the darkness, dragging a length of chain still clasped around one wrist. Her other arm swept something, her child, behind her as she rose like a feral spirit from a nightmare. Her face was dirt-streaked, sunken, jaw clenched with fury and fear. She raised the broken chain like a weapon and screamed, "Stay back!" Wes didn't reach for the gun at his hip, didn't raise his hands. He did the one thing no one in that town would have expected. He sank slowly to his knees, lowered the lamp beside him, and said nothing. Then he held out one hand, palm up, unarmed, unmoving. The chain in her grip trembled. "I didn't buy this barn to store anything," Wes said quietly. "I bought it to save someone. I just didn't know who." The silence that followed was louder than any gunshot. If stories like this pull you in, if your heart beats a little faster when light meets shadow and truth waits underground, then stick with us. Hit that hype button and stay for what's coming next. This is only the beginning. And some beginnings come with chains. Wes's cabin sat just beyond the reach of the town's gossip and smoke. A 2-room shack with a stove that creaked like old bones and a cot that had not been slept in for weeks. Now it held something far more fragile than solitude. Clara Jennings lay on that cot, her wrists bruised, her face pale with exhaustion. Next to her, curled under a thick wool blanket, was her son, Ben, just 5 years old. Thin as a whip, silent as a stone. He had not spoken since Wes carried him out of that basement. They had slept nearly 24 hours. Now Clara was awake, propped against the wooden wall, her eyes flickering across the room as if she still expected chains to snap shut at any moment. Wes handed her a cup of water and a piece of bread. She took both with trembling hands, but did not speak. Not yet. He did not press. Outside, the wind scraped dust against the window. The barn sat quiet across the rise, but Wes's mind hadn't stopped since the moment he saw her eyes in the dark. The marks, the chains, the smell. That place was not just forgotten, it was used, recently, repeatedly. And he needed to know for what. Clara finally broke the silence. Her voice was dry, broken, like it hadn't been used in days. "You the one who opened the door?" Wes nodded. She stared at him for a long moment, as if weighing the cost of the truth. "I thought I was going to die in there," she said. Wes sat in the chair across from her, elbows on knees, silent. Clara sipped the water, eyes never leaving his. "They took us on the road between Cross Bend and here," she continued. "Said they were taking us to work on a ranch near the border. Seemed decent at first. One man even had a badge on his belt." Wes's jaw tightened. Didn't take long to realize there was no ranch, just a wagon with locked doors and no windows. They had 4 other girls already, all younger, all scared out of their minds. She paused, looked at Ben, who slept soundly beside her. "They moved us at night. Stopped once for food, then nothing. We got to that barn 4 days ago, maybe 5. They dragged us into that hole like livestock." Wes said quietly, "How many were there?" "Girls? 5. Men, 3 I saw. 1 ran the others, tall. Spoke slow, like he was smarter than the rest. Always smoked a cigar with cloves in it. That's how you knew he was coming." Wes clenched his fists, Clara noticed, but her voice remained steady. "They kept us in cages, metal pens, like for dogs. They had ropes and a stick with hooks on it. Used it when one of the girls tried to run, took her out bleeding. She never came back." Her throat worked as she swallowed hard. "They took 2 girls the second night. A wagon came, no lights, just a knock on the trap door. One by one, they led them out like it was nothing." "And you?" Wes asked. Clara looked away. "I had Ben. They didn't like that. Said kids were trouble. Said I was too loud, too angry. Said I was going to wait till he came." Wes frowned. "He?" She nodded slowly. "The man who pays the most. They said he liked women who didn't break easy, liked making them break himself." Wes leaned back slowly in his chair, the weight of what she said anchoring in his chest. She looked back at him. "You believe me?" He nodded. Without hesitation. "I believe every damn word." A long silence passed. "Then," quietly, Clara added, "there were names scratched into the wall, dozens, some with dates. I think it's been going on longer than anyone knows." Wes stood and paced. The room was suddenly too small, the air too tight. "You saw their faces?" "2 of them. One had a star tattoo on his neck. The other wore a preacher's coat but cussed like a miner. I don't know their names." "That's enough," Wes said. She raised her brow. "Enough for what?" He turned toward the door. "To start digging." Back at the barn, Wes inspected every inch of the cellar, with Clara's voice in his ears. The cages were real, the chains, the ropes, the marks on the floor, all of it. Vials in a corner, torn scraps of women's clothing. A ledger half burned but not entirely gone. And a smell he would never forget. He stood over that space, fists clenched. This was not just a crime. It was a system, and it had roots right here, in the bones of Red Hollow. The Red Hollow Sheriff's Office was housed in a brick building that looked more like a dry goods store than a place of justice. A rusting sign hung above the door, swinging in the breeze like it, too, had grown tired of pretending. Wes stood at the threshold for a long moment. Inside, Clara waited with Ben in his arms, wrapped in a coat 3 sizes too big and still too thin for comfort. Her jaw was set, but her hands trembled at her sides. The bell above the door jingled as they entered. Sheriff Thorne Beckett looked up from behind his desk, tall, square-jawed, with eyes that scanned like a rifle scope. His badge gleamed, but there was dust on the edges of his boots. "Morning," he said. "You all look like you seen a ghost." Wes stepped forward, voice steady. "We found something. Under the old Maddox barn." Beckett leaned back in his chair. "That's so." Wes nodded. "Chains, cages, blood, a woman and her child, locked down there, alive." Beckett's smile didn't falter, but something flickered in his eyes. Clara stepped forward, her voice hoarse but clear. "We weren't the first. There were others before me, girls. They were taken." Ben buried his face in Wes's shoulder. Beckett's smile faded. "This town's got enough problems without folks stirring up ghost stories." "It's not a story," Wes said, voice harder now. "You want to see the bruises, the rusted locks, the half-burned ledgers?" Beckett stood slowly, brushing imaginary dust off his shirt. "Mr. Callahan, I respect what you're trying to do, but sometimes poking into the past only invites more trouble. That barn's been empty for years. Ain't nobody seen anything suspicious?" Clara stared at him. Something in her face shifted. Then, quietly, "You were there." Beckett froze. Her voice was cold steel. "The second night. You drove the wagon. You wore gloves. Your hat sat low. But I saw your face in the lamplight when you passed me to the next man. I remember your voice." The room went still. Wes didn't move. Beckett's hand twitched near his belt, but not for the gun, just enough to remind them it was there. "I think you're confused," Beckett said evenly. "Stress can do strange things to memory. You were in a rough spot, ma'am. Maybe you dreamed it." "I didn't." The silence was thick. Then Beckett spoke again, softer, as if offering a compromise. "This town runs on stability. The church, the ranches, the supply lines, all depend on peace. You go spreading rumors about kidnapping rings and sheriff involvement, people panic, prices drop, investors pull out, families lose work. We can't have that, can we?" Wes took a step forward. "You're saying it's better to let it continue?" Beckett's eyes met his. "I'm saying some truths do more damage than good. If someone's been oozing that barn for bad business, well, that's unfortunate. But there's no hard evidence, not unless you want to make yourself a target." "I don't scare easy," Wes said. Beckett's voice turned sharp. "No, but the people around you might. Women, children. You bring the wrong kind of attention to this and someone else ends up in a hole." The unspoken threat settled heavy. Clara looked at Wes. Wes looked at Ben. Then back at Beckett. "This ain't over," Wes said, voice low. "I reckon it is," Beckett replied. As they turned to leave, Beckett added casually, "Best you put that girl on a train out of here. New faces stir up old stories. Let the dust settle, Callahan." But Wes didn't answer. Back outside, the sky was high and harsh. Clara's legs almost gave beneath her, but Wes caught her before she fell. "That was him," she whispered. "It was him. I knew it." Wes nodded. "I believe you." She looked at him. "Now what?" He didn't speak for a long moment. Then finally, "Now we stop pretending Red Hollow's clean. Now we show the filth to the light." She stared at him, trembling, but in her eyes, just for a second, there was fire. The train to El Paso wouldn't arrive until morning, but Clara had already packed. A small sack sat at the edge of Wes's table, what little she owned folded neatly inside, a worn dress, a cracked photo, and a pair of shoes missing a heel. Ben slept curled on the cot by the fire, his breathing shallow but steady. Wes stood by the door, silent. "I appreciate what you've done," Clara said, voice flat. "But I can't stay here. I won't let Ben grow up in a town where the floorboards breathe and no one listens." Wes nodded. He didn't try to argue. Instead, he walked to his workbench and opened a drawer. From it, he pulled a small leather notebook, edges scuffed, the cover cracked from years of use. Beside it, he placed a stubby blacksmith's pencil, its tip worn nearly to the wood. He set them gently on the table between them. "No one's asking you to stay," he said. "But before you go, maybe write down what happened. Not for me, not even for Ben." Clara stared at the items. "For who, then?" she asked. "For the one still down there. Or might be one day." She didn't respond. "I figure," Wes continued, "a truth locked in your head dies with you. But a truth written down? It lingers." She hesitated. Wes didn't push. He picked up his coat and stepped out into the wind, leaving the door slightly ajar. Alone in the room, Clara sat. The fire cracked. Outside, horses whinnied from the stable. She looked at the notebook, then at Ben. Then slowly, carefully, she sat down, opened the cover, and stared at the first blank page. Her hand trembled as she touched pencil to paper. Day 1. The words were barely legible at first, written in a shaky scrawl. "They tied my hands to the rail. Eliza was already there. She couldn't speak. I think they cut her tongue." Clara stopped, her breath catching in her throat. The memories came too fast, too loud. She closed her eyes, then wrote more. Day 3, they took her away. I tried to hold her hand, but it slipped from mine. I never saw her again. The fire pop, she wrote slower now, but steadier. The men always came at night. Boots on wood, chains rattling. Sometimes they joked. One said I was too much trouble. They said they'd wait until he came back to decide what to do with me and the boy. She paused again, looked at Ben's sleeping face, then continued. Day 6. No food, no light. I told Ben stories from the Bible, even though I couldn't remember most of them. He held my hand and said, "We'll get out, Mama." He was the strong one. Tears blurred her vision. But she kept writing. Each sentence burned into the page like a scar, not polished, not poetic, just the truth. When Wes returned hours later, the oil lamp still glowed. Clara didn't look up. Her hair was loose, her fingers smudged with graphite. The notebook was half full. She finally whispered, "I thought writing it would make it worse, but it didn't." "Oh." Wes walked to the table, picked up the notebook and thumbed through the first few pages. He didn't speak. He just closed the cover and looked at her. "Thank you," he said. She nodded, her voice steadier now. "I don't know if I can stay." "That's fair, but I need to see this through." Wes didn't smile. He just stepped aside, motioned to the chair at the head of the table. "You're not the only one who needs to know what happened. This," he tapped the notebook, "might be the first nail in their coffin." Clara looked down at her hands. "They tried to erase us," she said. They failed. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the old boards of the cabin like a whisper too long silenced. But inside, something had shifted. Not hope, exactly. Something quieter, more dangerous. Resolve. The White House looked dead in the dark. Just another rotting shell on the edge of Red Hollow, where shadows clung tighter than justice. But inside, the air breathed differently tonight. Wes crouched in the brush 50 paces from the side entrance, flanked by 2 other blacksmiths and a farmhand named Ellis who owed him a debt older than law. Their hammers had been dulled to look like tools, not weapons, but the weight behind them hadn't changed. From the front, Clara walked alone. Her hands were bound loosely behind her back with twine she could snap in seconds. She had dusted her dress to look like she'd been wandering, begging, her hair tied down to hide the fire in her eyes. The guard at the door squinted, then leaned forward. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "The runaway doves come fluttering back." Clara dropped to her knees. "Got nowhere else," she whispered. "You said he'd pay more for girls who didn't fight. I can be quiet now." The man snorted. "I doubt it. But quiet don't matter long. Truck's coming soon." He opened the door. Clara hesitated. He grabbed her elbow roughly. "Too late for second thoughts, sweetheart." But Clara didn't resist. She stepped inside the warehouse and passed him just long enough to slide the knife from his hip. Outside, Wes saw the signal, a flicker from the upper window. Once, twice. Hold. He nodded. They moved. The side door came off with a push and a groan of rusted hinges. Inside, the smell hit first. Sweat, blood, oil. The trap was fast. Ellis took the first man clean with the butt of a hammer. Wes moved straight to the back, toward the metal cages. He knew the sound of fear now. It rang like a cracked bell. 3 girls, barely older than Clara, huddled in one cage. One of them slumped against the bars, burning with fever. Her lips moved without sound. "Get them out," Clara shouted. She held the guard's knife now, blood on her wrist where rope had bitten earlier. Wes tore at the cage's bolt. It was newer than the others. He glanced around for something, anything, then slammed his shoulder into the lock. It gave with a crack and a flare of pain through his wounded side. But the door swung. Then, chaos. From the upper loft, 2 more men jumped down. One lunged at Clara. She ducked and drove her blade upward. Another scrambled toward the door, trying to call for help. Wes tackled him mid-step. Then he heard it. Ben screamed. He turned, and time slowed. A man had slipped past them all, had grabbed the boy from behind a stack of crates. Ben thrashed, kicking, crying out. Wes didn't think. He dropped everything and charged. The man pulled a knife. "Back off or the kid gets it." Wes didn't stop. The blade flashed. Pain tore through his shoulder. Still, he didn't stop. He slammed into the man, arms wrapping around Ben and twisting the attacker's wrist with everything he had. They fell in a heap, Ben screaming, Wes bleeding, the attacker cursing. The knife clattered across the floor. Before the man could reach it, was a blur of movement. Clara. She had picked up a length of chain. With a scream that ripped from her throat, she swung it wide, full arc. The steel struck the man's back with a crunch. He fell, stunned. Clara didn't stop. She struck again, then dropped the chain, panting. Wes rolled to his knees, still holding Ben. The boy clutched him, shaking. "It's okay," Wes whispered. "You're okay. I got you." Behind them, the fire in Clara's eyes burned. But it wasn't vengeance anymore. It was resolve. The chain still hung in her hand, dripping red. The man who once used it to bind was now bound by it. And the woman who once wore it? She had broken its power. Morning came with a stillness too sharp to be peace. It was the quiet of breath held, of truth walking through a door it had been locked behind for too long. At the center of Red Hollow's town square, Wes stood on the old well platform, his shirt still blood-stained, shoulder wrapped in bandage. Beside him stood Clara, her eyes steady but pale, clutching the leather-bound notebook. The townspeople gathered slowly, whispering. Wes raised his voice, not loud but unshaking. "This town laughs at ghosts, pretends evil only rides from outside, but it has been riding under our boots the whole time." He held up the notebook. "And here are the names of girls taken, what they wore, what they said before they were dragged into chains. Written by someone who survived it." Clara stepped forward, opened to a page, and read. "Eliza had a red ribbon in her hair. She said she liked horses. On the 3rd night, they took her. I heard her scream once. Then nothing. Eliza screamed. Silence. Then Wes laid out the second piece, a sketch he'd made, with measurements, detailing the basement, every cage, every shackle. "We broke into that place last night," he said. 3 more girls were about to be loaded onto a wagon. One of them had a fever of 104, another hadn't eaten in 3 days, and Ben—" he paused, looking at the boy in the crowd. "Ben was nearly taken again." He turned to the sheriff's office. "Beckett, come out here." The door creaked open. Sheriff Thorne Beckett stepped out, hat in hand, face unreadable. "You making accusations now, Callahan?" "I'm laying down evidence." Clara stepped forward again, her voice clear now. "You remember me, Sheriff. You helped load us in, Sweetwater. You said I'd get a job in Waco. You looked right at me." Beckett's jaw clenched. Ma'am, that's a serious— Do you remember the necklace I wore? She interrupted. Silver cross. My husband gave it to me before he died. I begged you not to take it. You told me pretty things make you weak. Gasps in the crowd. An old woman stepped forward, clutching a photograph. My niece vanished on the road to San Angelo 2 years ago. Her name was Eliza. She had a red ribbon. Others murmured. One by one, voices rose, stories of sisters, cousins, daughters. Too many gone. Too long ignored. Wes turned to the mayor. You want to pretend this town's clean? Or do you want to take out the garbage in broad daylight? The mayor, a man with more sense than courage, looked at the growing fury in the square and nodded to the deputy. Arrest him. Beckett went for his gun. Wes was faster. He didn't draw. He just stepped forward and punched the sheriff so hard his knees buckled. The deputy cuffed Beckett while he was still dazed. The rest, 3 men from the warehouse, 2 more from the town shipping yard, were arrested within the hour. No one resisted, not with 20 witnesses, not with Wes staring them down. The cage had broken, and light poured in. The old barn stood silent again, but no longer in fear. Smoke curled from its roof, this time from a forge, not a fire set in malice. Inside, Wes worked beneath the morning sun, cutting through broken boards. The floor had been scrubbed clean. The rusted chains, all of them, now lay coiled like snakes awaiting rebirth. He fed them into the forge, one by one. They hissed. He shaped them into handles, hinges, rails, things that opened, held, welcomed. Wherever once there were shackles, now there would be doors. And outside, hammers rang, not with dread, but purpose. Clara stood at the barn's entrance, sleeves rolled, sleeves smudged with dust. Around her, women from the rescue cleaned, painted, patched walls, and sewed curtains. Each of them had a scar. Each of them had a name. They wore both, openly. On the main beam above the door, Clara painted, in bold black strokes, the Red Hollow Haven, a place where no one waits in chains again. Behind her, little Ben dragged something across the dirt, a wooden sign he'd carved with Wes's old chisel. He held it up proudly, though it was crooked and misspelled. No one gets tied here no more. Everyone laughed, then teared up. Clara knelt down beside him. May I fix the grammar just a little? She whispered. Ben pouted. But I like it that way. She kissed his forehead. Then we'll leave it just as it is. They hung the sign right beneath the new door handle, the one Wes had forged from the chain that had once held Clara herself. That night, Wes sat alone on the porch steps of the barn. He ran his hand along the warm wood beside him, where there used to be iron. Clara walked up quietly, carrying 2 mugs of strong coffee. You worked all day, she said. So did you. She sat beside him. They looked at the barn, no longer a place of shadows. Its windows glowed. Inside, laughter rang, and somewhere someone strummed a broken guitar they had found behind the tool shed. Wes stared ahead for a long moment. Then, quietly, they used to come here to vanish. Clara nodded. Now, they come to be seen. He glanced at her. You made that happen. She shook her head. We did. Wes hesitated, then reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it. A door key, forged from the final link of the last chain. He pressed it into her palm. Every place needs someone to lock up at night, he said. Clara looked at him, eyes soft, then slid her hand into his. Only if you're there to open it in the morning. 6 months later, the barn, once filled with chains, had become something else entirely. Sunlight warmed its whitewashed walls. The sign above the door had been repainted, but still read the same, the Red Hollow Haven. Inside, children laughed over their lessons, while women chopped vegetables for supper or helped each other sew, mend, build. The place buzzed, not with fear or command, but with the hum of life being rebuilt. Clara walked through the halls with calm steps and sure hands. People listened when she spoke. She had earned that. Behind the barn, Wes stood in front of his forge, sleeves rolled, sweat streaking his neck as he hammered a bent stirrup back into shape. A few young boys watched with quiet admiration. He showed one how to hold the tongs steady, how not to flinch from heat. This was their rhythm now, day after day, working side by side. Clara managed the haven, Wes trained, built, fixed. They rarely spoke of the past, not out of avoidance, but because they no longer had to. Yet some things still remained unsaid. One evening, as the last light of the sun dipped over the ridge, Wes stayed behind to finish reshoeing a horse. The air smelled like warm iron and hay. Clara stepped out from the side door, 2 mugs in her hand. "You always forget to stop," she said. Wes wiped his brow with a rag. "The horse won't wait till morning." She handed him the mug, strong, black coffee the way he liked it. Then from the pocket of her apron she pulled out something else, an old, weathered notebook. He recognized it immediately. She opened it slowly, flipping past the earlier pages, filled with jagged, trembling handwriting. Her testimony. Her truth. Finally, she reached the last page. She handed it to him, hesitated, then read. "If you hadn't appeared in that cellar, I'd have had nothing left to write. If you hadn't laid down your knife, I'd never have believed again. And if you hadn't taught me to be brave, I'd never have dared to love again." Wes lowered the notebook slowly, eyes shining beneath the brim of his hat. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he looked up at her. He stepped closer, carefully, deliberately, took her hand, not quickly, not hungrily, but with a quiet certainty. "You don't need to write another word," he said, voice rough and steady. "I'll live the rest of it with you." Clara didn't answer with words. She stepped into his arms, rested her forehead against his shoulder. No more chains. No more running, just 2 people, once broken, now whole, beneath a sky that no longer felt too wide. From inside the barn, Ben's laughter echoed.